Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session of Talking Tech. My name is Loyce Witherspoon, and I currently work at the Internet Society. And I'm delighted to be here today with Abadesi. She is the founder and CEO of Hustle Crew, author of Dream Big, Hustle Hard, a book which is now on Amazon, as well as the co-host of the Techish podcast, which is undoubtedly my most listened podcast yet. Talking Tech is a series about celebrating girls and women in tech. It's being recorded around the world between Girls in ICT Day 2020 and 2021. Girls in ICT Day is an international day marked on the fourth Thursday of each April. This year it was held on the 23rd of April. And the main objective of Girls in ICT Day is to help create a global environment that empowers and encourages girls and young women across the world to consider studies and careers in the growing field of ICTs, information and communication technologies. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, the UN Specialized Agency for Technology, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, in support of Equals, the global partnership to bridge the divide between women and girls in tech. The goals of this series today is to inspire girls and younger women to consider a career in ICTs, to bring before a broad audience a role model in tech and share their journeys through their career over time, to offer a diverse example of how ICTs are being used to promote the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to showcase initiatives that are working with girls to support them in their future careers or studies, and finally to provide girls and young women in tech with a leadership opportunity to represent and promote a girls in tech organization with which they are involved and promoted to a broader international audience. So with that, I've had the huge pleasure of following Abadesi for a couple of years and know quite a bit about her journey, but for the benefit of the audience, could you introduce yourself and let us know what you currently do?
Oh, well, thank you so much, Loyce. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to share as much advice as I can, especially because I do feel like I fell into technology. I never planned to work in technology, but now that I've been in this industry, I can't imagine working anywhere else. It's so incredibly exciting. You know, we get to build the future every day. So about me, I have a few hats that I wear in my day-to-day. I'm currently working at Brandwatch, a software company, as their first ever VP of Global Community and Belonging. I am, of course, the founder and CEO of Hustle Crew as well. We are a careers community for the underrepresented in tech on a mission to make tech more inclusive. As you mentioned, I'm an author too. I wrote Dream Big, Hustle Hard, the Millennial Woman's Guide to Success in Tech a few years ago, really to serve as a careers advice book to shatter lots of myths about what it's like to work in tech and offer personalized advice for women in patriarchal society. And yeah, I'm also a co-host of the weekly podcast Techish, which is a show all about news at the intersection of tech, social impact, pop culture, everyday life. I think it's really important for all of us as human beings to participate in conversations about how we use tech and how tech is developed. And a lot of the time, information about tech can feel a bit opaque. So Techish, we try to break it down and also hopefully make it entertaining.
You definitely do. You definitely accomplished that goal. Thank you, and what an introduction. I think it's very easy to listen to where you are now from a young girl's perspective and see all of the things you've accomplished in this time. But I'd actually love to go back down memory lane and
Yeah.
hear a bit about your childhood. What were your dreams at the time, and what did you imagine doing in the future?
Yeah, so many things, so many things. I think as someone that grew up in a multicultural background, in an immigrant background, you know, my mother's from the Philippines, my father's from Nigeria, they moved to the US and they really had this sense of education is everything. You know, they always wanted their children to have better lives than them, better opportunities than them. And from a young age, I knew that working hard was going to have to be like an important theme in my life, because I was like, I'm going to get beats if I don't, or like, it's just, I don't want to disappoint my parents, like the worst thing you can do is like a child is to disappoint your parents. But at the same time, I had a really wild imagination, I had a really wild imagination. My parents, really like actively encouraged it. And I was very creative. So I had all sorts of ideas of what I might do. I wanted to write children's books and be like the author and the illustrator. I wanted to travel to space because, especially when I was a young kid in America, you're so sold the propaganda of like NASA and like, conquering space, even though we haven't sorted out problems on Earth. But, I was like, woohoo, yeah, let me like go like fly around space as an astronaut. As I became more involved in like school activities and extracurricular activities, I loved the make-believe world that plays presented and theater presented. And as I got older, participating in school plays all the time, and even in the acclaimed National Youth Theatre in London, for a long time I thought, oh, maybe I'll be an actor. That would be an amazing thing to do. So yeah, I've really kind of like spread across the whole gauntlet of things. I did also really want to be a lawyer because I watched Ally McBeal. I was obsessed with that show, and I was like, I guess like 10 or 11. And I just thought it was like really funny. Like you work in this like law firm where you're always cracking jokes with your buddies. Like I now know that law isn't exactly like that, but I was like, then you get to like go into like the courtroom and be like, objection. Like I just felt like it looked very like dramatic. And also when I was young, I just like talked a lot, and I was like, what are the jobs that you can do where it's like good to talk a lot and you can get paid a lot of money? So I thought law, but as I got older, I soon realized I was like, oh, there's a bit more to it than that. So yeah, but yeah, these are all the things. And like not once, sadly, did I ever think, hey, I'll work in technology, because I just didn't know what tech was. I mean, I played video games here and there. I, built basic pages on websites like MySpace and stuff like that as I was growing up, Yahoo GeoCities, but it never occurred to me to think about what goes on behind the scenes. I've never really been encouraged to do that. So yeah, I just kind of went through like all of education without even really considering that tech would be for me. And I think a big part of that was also because I thought the only part of tech that you could be in as a worker was the coding part. And I'd seen my brother code a bit on like Visual Basic and stuff like that. And I'd done a bit of HTML and CSS, and I was like, that's it? I don't know if that's for me. So yeah, it's really funny to now think that this is my life and where I've ended up.
Yeah. And so how did you go from having those thoughts and perspectives and hopping between your different passion areas and things you imagined yourself doing to then actually falling into tech? What did that journey look like?
Yeah, I mean, I always love that Steve Jobs quote where he says, you can't connect the dots looking forwards. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, I'm 33 years old now. So it's very easy for me to kind of like come up with this beautiful narrative of my time in technology, but it is designed, right? Like at the same time, for all of my successes are like hundreds of failures. I've lost track of counting, right? But I've created a more compelling story than, hey, I failed a lot of times, here I am. So the way that I ended up in tech was really at the beginning of my professional life. I graduated during a recession, the last recession, 2009. And I was really unprepared to enter the job market in a time of economic uncertainty. I had this idea in my mind that because I'd attended London School of Economics, I had an economics degree, I had a, upper second class, I'd be, I just thought that people just opened the doors for you. Like, come on in, grad, we'd love to hire you. So I was like, woo! The reality was there were hardly any jobs. So my mindset immediately became, okay, any job is good enough. And it meant that the first job that was offered to me, the first permanent role that was offered to me, I just took. And it just so happened to be at a financial publishing company where I would be organizing conferences for investment bankers and chief financial officers. So it was my job to understand market trends, develop the agendas, source the speakers, and then run these events. And, it was as exciting as it sounds, okay? So the best part about that job was I could travel to cool places like Brazil and Dubai because, these are the big finance hubs that we were focused on. But at the end of the day, it was just hanging around with a bunch of like stiff corporate rich men who were making decisions about how to spend their money. And I was just like, did I really spend 3 years at university slaving away to do this? And there was, of course, the tension that existed because, you know, I was existing in a crisis created by the people I was now working for. And that did not make me feel good. So I was like, I need to do something more fulfilling. Now, at the time, I was just like, the charity world really didn't appeal to me because I feel like it had its own issues with like white saviors and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, I want to do something different, but I really want it to be like a fast-paced, dynamic, exciting environment. And I was just sort of like keeping my eyes and ears open for any type of inspiration. And then I watched the movie The Social Network, which is the story of Facebook. And I just started to realize like what it takes to build a tech company. And it's not just coding and there's also like scheming and plotting, and you know, you can work in a startup even if you don't code because there's all these other jobs. And I suddenly thought, wow, I really had the wrong idea of tech. I completely didn't, you know, realize there are all these other things you could do. So that's when I was like, that is the place I need to get to. I need to get into a startup. I need to, you know, do sales or marketing or something that builds on the skills that I have. I need to get on a rocket ship, and then I need to become a billionaire like Mark Zuckerberg, because that is way more interesting than my current job. So that's basically what I did. I worked my network, and before I knew it, I found myself at Groupon a year before their IPO, so their initial public offering where they floated on the stock market, on a rocket ship. And it was incredible. It was the beginning of my journey, and you know, I've never looked back since.
Wow, what a story. What a story. And I think it's really important throughout those early stages of your career to be very introspective and to really ask yourself those difficult questions, because for many it's easy to just stay in a role, you know, collect your paycheck and not really critically think about where this fits in with your narrative and where you want to go, and does this moment actually contribute to where you want to go in the future. So I think that's a really important lesson.
Yes, I agree. And the thing that I'll say is like, you don't need the answers. You don't need the answers, you just need the energy. And the universe will send the answers to you. You know, I never knew whether or not I'd start a business. I never knew what it would be about. But each point in my journey, I suddenly thought, okay, maybe now's the time to try this. And if I could share one thing, it would be take risks. Because the thing about taking risks is, yes, they do often fail, but when they don't fail, they lead to incredibly exciting things. And I think especially as women in patriarchy, we're socialized to be nice, play nice, be likable. And sometimes taking risks makes you unlikable to your family, unlikable to the teachers who have an idea of what you should do with all of this potential. But guess what? All of the people that we admire have taken risks. Look, when Beyonce left Destiny's Child, there was no guarantee she would be successful, right? But
And look at her
hey,
now.
did it, Queen Bee.
You know, I'm so happy you touched on this, because this is something that I still struggle with to this day. And I think when you do have multiple interests,
Yes.
you try to play it safe, and you know, you say which of these interests will give me maybe some level of security, will fit into the story that I've created for myself. And in doing so, you block off these parts of yourself that are really significant, but sometimes you aren't willing to take that jump and take that leap into faith and exploration and just give yourself the time to explore. And so, what advice would you have for a young girl,
Yes.
maybe trying to move into tech, in tech currently, just trying to discover where she fits in? How do you actually go from a place to knowing that where you are right now isn't where you want to be, to
Yes.
actually making the steps in that direction? What advice would you have?
Yeah, so there's a few things here. I think the first thing I'd say is know your strengths.
Mm,
And it's true that like it is a sign of very intelligent, very creative people that you are good at everything. You're good at many, many things. And you know, that's not a bad thing, but you need to be a bit stricter on yourself and say, okay, I might be good at a lot of things, but what are the things I'm good at that are easy to me?
Mm.
What are the things I'm good at that I don't actually struggle to achieve compared to other people? Because those are where your true strengths lie. What are the things that you're good at that come easily to you and that you enjoy doing? Right? Because that means if you were to be put in a role where you had to use those skills, your 40-hour week would go like that,
Mm.
right? So
Mm.
that's the first thing you need to do. Like, have a very honest conversation with yourself about your number one strengths,
Mm.
because those are the ones that are easy to you, come naturally to you, and that you could use over and over and over again and hardly get tired. That's where your real strengths lie. So that's like the first thing to be knowledgeable of. The second thing is get comfortable
Mm.
talking about how you're good at those things,
Mm.
because we do a really bad job of selling ourselves. But you know what, if you can like ship code like that, or you can like turn a complex problem into a sentence like that, if you can explain, you know, complex things to a 4-year-old like that, if you can win over a relationship like that, build trust like that, influence people like that, whatever it is, own it.
Yes.
Own it. Don't be like, I mean, I guess sometimes I'm not sure, like maybe. No, like just be like, this is what I'm really good at,
Yeah.
you should hire me to do that. You know, that's the other thing. And then the third thing I'd say is completely change your relationship with failure. When I first entered the working world, I was terrified of failure. I was such a perfectionist. I would procrastinate. I would like not show anyone my work until I thought it was perfect. And then when I showed it to them and they're like, oh, there's a typo, I'd cry. I'd be like, no, you know, I was basically like setting myself up for failure, right?
Mm.
Because of my avoidance of failure, right? I was sabotaging my plans. I
Mm.
completely changed my relationship with failure. I was like, I want to fail. Let me fail. Because if I'm failing, it means I'm taking risks, it means I'm showing courage, and it means I'm growing. And
Mm.
it's very much like that saying, do something every day that scares you. You
Yes.
know, apply for the job you know you're not going to get. Just try.
Mm.
Call the founder of that startup that you're obsessed with. Who cares? The
Mm.
worst thing he's going to do is say, I'm too busy, I don't want to talk to you. Like, just do those scary things
Mm.
and let yourself fail, because when you fail you grow. And now like I'm not afraid of failing. I'll be applying for things where it's just like, oh, someone with like 30 years experience. I was like, okay, I'm in my 30s, but let me just try anyway. Like maybe I started
Why
learning in the
not?
womb, I don't know, maybe I'm good enough, we'll see.
I love that advice. I love that advice. And it's interesting to see those perspectives and where you are now, years later, with Hustle Crew.
Yeah.
And listening to Techish, you've shared a lot around what your journey through Hustle Crew has been, and especially now in this post Floyd era, where you're
Mm,
seeing a surge of companies out of the blue now
totally.
willing to invest in DNI years after they've been completely silent on the issue.
Mm.
So, in addition to taking risks, how do you think you have navigated tech as not just a woman, but a woman of color? And how have you embraced and owned, I guess, what you're good at, but also just remained confident in
Yeah.
times where you do fail as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I've just developed a habit of questioning everything, because what I've realized is I'm existing in a society that was not designed for people like me to succeed. You know, a few hundred years ago, people like me were literally enslaved
Yeah.
with no individual agency, right? In countries like the US and beyond. So one of the things that I've realized is when I was younger, I was still buying into the lies that society perpetuates, that we are all equal, that, oh, we're in a post-racial society,
Oh,
meritocracy is real, you know, you just work hard and you get all the opportunities. And I'm like, okay, so if that's the case, then why do women get paid less than men for the same role, even though we also negotiate? Or if that's the case, why do black women get paid less than white women for the same role? I was like, something doesn't add up here, because y'all said we were all equal, but when I look at the money, we're not. So that's when I was just like, wow, okay, so what I need to remember is people are buying into the lies. People are buying into these narratives because these narratives are perpetuated in the media. These narratives make people feel better about their own position in society. They don't want to acknowledge that they had privilege. They don't want to acknowledge that they had an easier ride. No man wants to wake up in the morning and go, the world is an easier place to be in because I'm a man. Like, no, you want to be like, no, I've suffered as much as a woman. And in a similar way, no white person wants to wake up and go, the world isn't, you know, the workplace is an easier place for me to be because I'm white. You don't want to think that, right? You want to think like, we're equal, there's no racism, I'm colorblind. So for me, just basically increasing my education in the world of feminism, in the world of social justice, looking at what academics that look like me have said about what the data shows, where the world is, what the world is really like, gave me the power to constantly question things like, I disagree, actually. Do you know about this study that shows this? Do you know about this research that says that? And people are like, oh, no, I didn't know that. And, when I was fundraising in the early days of Hustle Crew, investors would be like, no one needs this. No one needs a community for the underrepresented in tech. People in tech have the same experiences. And I was like, you are negating my experience right now, because I have not had this experience. And they're like, well, you're anomalous. I don't believe that this is an issue. So, for me, it was like being able to own my experience, my reality, and cling onto that, even when people said it wasn't the case. That's what gave me power. And I think each of us as women, every person listening to this, your experience is your truth, and your truth is your power. Don't let anyone challenge that. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because guess what? Me owning my truth has now created an opportunity for me to capitalize on it, right? And I now own 100% of my company. We're profitable. We've been growing our team. And guess what? I didn't even need those investors in the end.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think you've touched on a really interesting point. I'm going to segue into that because, on the one hand, black women like you and I exist at the intersection of privilege and disadvantage, right? On the disadvantage scale, we are black women. We have both lived and been raised in the West where we were a minority, yet on the other hand, have had access to education. We are heterosexual. We have jobs in tech currently, despite the looming recession, and we have a network as a result of it. So, what do you think that we can do to really lift up more women like us in the space of tech, where we know in any company there will be little to no women that look like us in
100%.
positions of leadership? Where we do exist will be junior staff, will be admin. How do we use our power and privilege as black women to ensure that 5, 10, 15, 20 XXX years from now, that rooms represent us, spaces represent us?
It's a great question. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, especially in the context of my roles and the people I'm interacting with all the time. I think we've been really fortunate to come out of Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 and understand that racism is not a Black and brown and indigenous people problem, right? Racism is very much a white problem because white people created the concept of race. And in that same way, I think Black women in companies have an opportunity to raise awareness with white individuals, white women and white men, and remind them that they play a huge role in increasing representation, just engaging with their white identity. Like, do you know what it means to be white? Do you know the history in this country of racism? Do you understand it? Do you know the role that white people have played in perpetuating inequality? Go do your homework, go understand it, and come back and let's talk about it. Don't shy away from these difficult topics anymore. And do you know that because of your race in this society, you have privileges that I don't? For example, if you start campaigning for diversity schemes, your voice will be louder than mine. By virtue of you being a man, by virtue of you being white. So how do we work together to make sure the future is better than the present? Because in the past, white people didn't do enough. And now we have an opportunity to get you more involved. That's what I think we should do.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. And I don't think enough people within tech really understand the nuances of intersectionality. And so identity are seen as these single strands. So let's do D&I, but let's focus on women. And that will be our entry point, but we won't consider all of the other identities that interplay with that. So starting and sparking a broader conversation within tech spaces around how to create more psychological safety for individuals that exist at the intersection is extremely important. And I'm hoping that some of the momentum that we've seen with Floyd will continue. And
me too.
It's such a shame that whenever we see these huge spikes of interest in marginalized groups, it follows a tragedy. And
Mm.
did it have to take his death being publicized and shared across social media for us to really start having these conversations within the tech space? But that's a conversation for another day. But back to this. So we've spoken a lot about your journey through tech, what your dreams were when you were younger, where you are now, years later. So if you were to be in a room face to face with a younger Abadesi 10
Yeah.
years ago, you would have been 23.
Mm.
What would you say to yourself? What advice would you have to give?
I think what I would say is dare to be disliked. Dare to be disliked. I spent a lot of my younger years seeing myself through the eyes of others in a society that isn't used to seeing people like me as president, as CEO, as leader, as Fortune 500 company, award-winning business leader. So I think that meant that often when I shared my dreams, people were very quick to, just minimize them and limit them. And that also is something that I internalized. I started to believe that, like, maybe they are right. Maybe I do talk too much. Maybe I am too loud. Maybe I am too aggressive. Maybe I am too outspoken. Now, the irony is it's all of those things that people said were too much that I get paid for, or that people support my business for, or listen to my podcast for, or buy my book for, right? So I was like, wow, I wish I could have just listened to myself and followed that instinct of what I knew was truly me and what I knew was right. But I was afraid of being disliked. I was afraid that if I didn't take that feedback on, I would lose friends, I would lose mentors, I would lose the support of my line managers. In reality, those were not the right friends or managers for me, right? So dare to be disliked, because that's when you push away the people that don't deserve the greatness that is in you, and you attract the people that support you and understand you for who you are.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And before we wrap up, I just have two final questions. So,
Sure.
for anyone looking to get into tech, what type of content would you advise they get into in terms of books,
Yeah.
podcasts? Well, we know one of those already, and blogs, anything you'd recommend people to get stuck into?
Yeah, so definitely check out Hustle Crew Live. Obviously, we are on Instagram, Twitter. You can also follow me or add me on LinkedIn. I'm posting stuff all the time about just different ways to get into tech and like the different things that are happening. Peopleofcolourintech.com is another great platform. You can listen to our podcast Techish too. The other thing that I'd say is once you've done that activity of understanding your strengths, it's really important for you to then try and find people who are similar to you in tech.
Mhm.
And they could be doing anything. They could be working in product design, UI, UX research. They might be engineers. They might be tech evangelists. They might be salespeople. They might be marketers. They might be ethicists. They could literally be anything. But by spending time on social media, following them, listening to their stories, reading their blog posts, you'll start to get a more realistic picture of what it actually looks like to apply those skills
Hmm.
in the workplace. So that would be the other thing I would say. And then another thing I would consider doing is just reading books written by women in tech. Not just my book, but really like anyone. And also not just women in tech, like find women who look like you or who you relate to, who have worked in the corporate world and have shared stories about their experience and learn from them. So like one that I'm reading now is like More Than Enough.
Hmm.
And this is a former editor of Teen Vogue, a Black woman, and Elaine Welteroth. It's really important to hear from underrepresented women like us about how they've experienced challenges and how they got through them, because it makes you feel less alone. And you're like, well, if she could do it, I can do it. And at least I know I'm not a freak. And this happens to other people too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. And where can our audience find you online?
Yeah, so at Abadesi, I'm the only Abadesi in the world as far as I know. So you can reach me on most social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and hashtag Techish on Twitter is how you can get in touch with us about the podcast. You can find Techish wherever you listen to podcasts. Hustle Crew Live is our social handle for our company. Again, Twitter, Instagram. You can also go on hustlecrew.co and subscribe to our newsletter and check us out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Abadesi. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and have a great day and weekend.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lois. I really enjoyed
Thank
this.
you. Thank you. Bye bye.